Hello and welcome to another podcast from Odell Technology. Today we're lucky enough to be joined by Dr. Poonam Malik, who is the Head of Investment at Strathclyde University, and Dr. Stuart Hannah, who is also the CEO of Microplate Dx Ltd.
Hi, Stephen. Good morning.
Good morning. It's nice to see you again. Thank you very much for joining us on this podcast. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind telling the audience a bit about yourself, your professional background, and how you ended up here, please.
Sure, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here and lovely to speak to you again. And both Stuart and I, we are looking forward to this discussion with you, as we've said. So my personal background, I'm a biomedical scientist, life sciences, infectious diseases expert in my previous life, if I could call it that, a recovering academic. And my PhD is in virology, molecular biology, host pathogen interaction. And from the early days, pathogens were very fascinated about those. And as the COVID has shown us during that period, that they are never too far away and appear in different lives. So even though I professionally moved more towards application of that knowledge, it's very relevant. And so I've been an academic and then worked with startups and translational of knowledge and recently so worked in multiple countries, India, UK, and have collaborators all over across globally, which are experts in their field, but also interested in the application of technology. And currently, I'm involved with Microplate DX as the co-founder with three other co-founder colleagues, as well as I'm currently in the chair role where we are looking to take the Microplate's focus and its wonderful technology forward.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the introduction. Very impressive. Dr. Hannah, would you mind talking about your professional background and how you ended up with Microplate DX, please?
Of course, yes. Hi there, Stephen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Pleasure to be here on the podcast. So in terms of my background, I've got a background in electronic and electrical engineering, actually at undergraduate and PhD level from the University of Strathclyde. My PhD was very much focused on developing actually flexible, stretchable, novel sensor-based technologies, with always a keen eye on the application of those sensors within biomedical type applications. So after I finished my PhD, I went off and did a postdoctoral research associate position in the south of France for about 18 months or so. That got me very much involved in developing biosensors to essentially try to cure urinary urge incontinence, a major healthcare problem. And off the back of that, with my experience in sort of sensors, diagnostics, and with that health tech angle to things, I rejoined the University of Strathclyde, this time in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. And at that point, I was working very closely alongside now two of the Microplate DX co-founders, Professors Damien Corrigan and Paul Hoskisson, developing and working on what was known at that point in time as the Microplate project. So, trying to come up with a rapid diagnostic to tackle antimicrobial resistance, which, certainly was speaking to my skill set in terms of the sensor development, but with that health tech angle. So, we got some funding from a number of sources, initially an academic project to be able to develop the proof of concept work. Off the back of that, we discovered that actually very quickly we could pinpoint the real difference between a major hospital-acquired infection, Staphylococcus aureus, and its drug-resistant strain, MRSA, about 45 minutes or so, which really gave us a lot of hope that there's real potential with this technology. Off the back of that, being involved with the university's commercialization team, etc., that's where Poonam then joins the story, came in as a fourth co-founder and now chair of the business, like she introduced. So, yeah, essentially, my story's been one of very much that sort of academic research background. It's then turned commercial, and now I'm the CEO of Microplate DX.
Congratulations. All right. Well, I might start with asking Dr. Malik about the unmet need and what the company is actually doing right now. Dr. Malik, would you mind?
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Stuart, for that interesting and exciting introduction about yourself. As Stuart has outlined, that there is a sort of real core team behind this Microplate DX technology. And the unmet need, as if I were to point out, that there are currently 1.27 million deaths per year from antimicrobial resistance. And it is been outlined very clearly that by 2050, if unchecked and done anything about it, it will be 10 million, more than diabetes and cancer combined. And just hold that thought for there, so that our major focus is going on there. But this one is looking like, and especially after the COVID pandemic, the challenges that we saw, and because of the treatment of patients in the hospitals and other things, antibiotic prescription increased a lot for the patients. And now it's been outlined with the major research that this is another silent pandemic waiting to happen. And the background for that is that there is currently no rapid way to determine if antibiotic is effective. The current gold standard protocol can take anything between 2 days to 5 days or 7 days in the hospitals if clinicians were to find out a confirmed way. And that being because first, it needs to be known if their infection is there. Second, then they need to know which and bacteria it is. And then it is known, third step is to know which bacteria it is and which antibiotic is working effectively against that. And that's done on an agar plate gold standard method, which is where, so as a result, it's a sequential process, and it takes day long to grow the bacteria, then to grow the bacteria in presence or absence of antibiotics. As a result, when the patients come to the clinicians, and if it is a critical need, emergency, or certain immediate need, then it's an empirical prescribing. So for example, right from a children to a pregnant woman to an elderly patient, or in the accident and emergency, or at that time, there's not enough time to wait for that 2 days, 3 days, 5 days timeline. So to that empirical prescription, if it is, it's a chance factor, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, the patient needs to come back, and the general practitioner or the doctor prescribes again. So what happens as a result is that antimicrobial resistance in the patient and the population is increasing. What Microplate DX's novel diagnostic offering is that we have coupled our proprietary system. It's called a miniaturized agar plate and the tip of an electrode. And then with electrochemical methods, we are providing that answer to the clinicians if a particular bacteria is there and it's been actually an antibiotic is going to be able to stop that or inhibit a resistant bacteria growing in presence of it in under an hour. And on top of that, with our proprietary AI algorithm, we are able to identify the optimum antibiotics immediately when a patient presents in under an hour, and different settings that can be seen, so that clinicians can prescribe the right antibiotic first time for immediate when needed, and reducing AMR globally and saving lives. So I think this is why we are saying it is a global game-changing technology, because we are able to do that phenotypically confirmation of antibiotic working effectively, and if a bacteria can be growing or be inhibited, and if it is resistant. So I think that's where we are excited about this offering.
Absolutely. So it's a game changer, really, isn't it? All right. So Dr. Hannah, could you tell me something about the pathway you've been through so far and this interesting thing called the R plate?
So absolutely, Stephen. So in terms of the R plate, I'll tackle that first. It really is as simple as the miniaturized agar plate, but doing it in a rapid manner. So R for rapid, plate for agar plate. And off the back of that, we can then have essentially hyphenated names around different different aspects to what we're trying to tackle. So, initially our beachhead opportunity very much focused on urinary tract infections. But that was born out of, I guess, years of academic research to begin with. So ultimately, as I mentioned, this started off life at the University of Strathclyde. We published that seminal paper in 2019 where we could show that clear discrepancy between Staphylococcus aureus and the drug-resistant strain MRSA, as I say, in 45 minutes or so. But off the back of that, because of that speed with which we could essentially determine which antibiotics were able to kill those bacteria in that time frame, it led to a significant amount of interest. A press release was put out and actually ended up being picked up internationally, the potential that this technology had. So we were getting, reports not just locally, but we were on the BBC. We had news crews in, and actually it made us realise, I think, as a team, that this has got real, not just clinical potential, but the healthcare potential is there too from a commercial angle. And off the back of that, and that's where bringing Poonam in was so game changing in terms of what we were looking at from a commercial point of view. But we had a number of steps to go through, not just in terms of the sort of investment journey to then spin out the business and establish that intellectual property position, but then building up, essentially looking at the potential market for the technology. So we went through a number of programs, Innovate UK's iCure program, to do that market discovery work. We had a lot of support in the early days from Scottish Enterprise as part of their high growth spin out program. Personally, I went through the Royal Society of Edinburgh's Enterprise Fellowship Programme, which on a personal level helped transition me from the sort of academic technical lead into the commercial lead on the project. But all the while bringing in the expertise within the team to be able to then start to de-risk the technology to the point that it's reached today. So starting off with MRSA, we then moved quickly, after doing that customer discovery work, into the urinary tract infection space, which is really attractive for a number of reasons. Technically, there's typically a lot more bacteria in a UTI sample than there might be in, say, a blood sample. So from a technical beachhead opportunity in terms of showing the potential of the technology, urine is a nice matrix to be able to work with by comparison to others. Clinically though, urinary tract infections, major challenge. You're talking about 150 million of these reported globally every year. But really starkly, 1 in 4 sepsis cases can actually be linked back to a poorly treated UTI. And to Poonam's earlier point, the amount of empirical prescribing of antibiotics that goes on is essentially leading to these poor patient outcomes. So being able to intervene earlier in that process and quickly, crucially getting patients onto the right antibiotic treatment if they have a UTI, can avoid numerous sepsis cases that result downstream. And from a commercial point of view, UTIs are about 40% of that market as well, which is clearly important when we're going out, we're seeking investment, and we're trying to establish ourselves as a young SME, but with global ambitions in the healthcare space. So I think there's a number of reasons why we're starting with UTI, Stephen, but going beyond that, we do have plans for this platform to be able to then move into sepsis, respiratory tract infections, meningitis, fungal infections, even key areas where the clinical need exists, and that rapid treatment for patients and the improved health outcomes become apparent.
So I would imagine at this point in time, you're classifying yourself as a point of care system and not a companion diagnostic.
That's absolutely right. Point of care, getting into the areas such as, primary care, accident and emergency urology. There's a number of areas where there's real clinical potential for the technology. The minute samples have to start being batched, sent off to centralized laboratories for testing, that's when you then lose that clear USP around the speed in which you can return that result. So point of care very much being the sort of primary market to this. That there is an argument as well that potentially this could go quite nicely alongside pharmaceutical companies developing new drugs, using the system as almost a sort of high throughput screening platform for novel antimicrobials being developed, again, much faster than gold standards. So it's a research use only type platform. There could be real potential there. But a primary market aim for us, we believe, certainly seems to be in gaining traction in that point of care space.
Dr. Malik, I see you've recently relocated to the Centre of Advanced Measurement, which is a place I know reasonably well. And you've been winning countless awards up in Scotland and have just recently received some additional funding. Can you tell me something about that?
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, so the company is located in the university. Earlier it was in Wolfson, and now recently migrated to one of our chief technology officers group and laboratories in the Centre for Advanced Measurement. And yes, we are pleased about the traction we are getting. And I think it is a sign of confidence of both the investors and the key opinion leaders, because they are the ones who are working and reviewing and judging the process. And if I could look back and look at the momentum since like in April 2022, when we spun out from the University of Strathclyde, the company, as Stuart outlined, it's a young SME spin out, but there is over 6 years, 8 years of research and testing deep technological advances behind that with various stages of a longitude prize research discovery, and it's a continuous evolution of both and then there is a deep expertise of technological advances in terms of our microbiologist, chief scientific officer, Paul Huskisson, and the chief technology officer, Professor Damien Corrigan, alongside Stuart and the team that's been built. In terms of even the staff that has been, basically, we took our first investment in April, May 2022. And that pre-seed round, we have followed it up with probably I would say 4 to 5 times the amount of investment. Again, closed another round in 2023. And I think that momentum, the staff numbers have increased from, say, 6 to 14 in the company. And that is all being put towards that growth. That is our global ambition, exciting trajectory of the company. We want to bring this technology to the market in the right places with like-minded adopters and partners who are and as we've just discussed before, that in that global ambition we are finding and setting up partnerships in the right areas, in the right geographic territories. So the awards are, I think, just a reflection of what we have actually been able to do inside the company, and that's being recognized by the market. So yes, we initially won last year in November. We were able to come out double winners of OBN, which is a life sciences technology award, and it was in London, so it was all of UK competitively. And then that was further substantiated in the Scotland Life Sciences Award. We managed to, in March 2023, we came up with the Best Health Science Innovation Award, and that too against competitively in some of the large, big existing players in the market. And similarly, this month, just end of last month, Barclays Entrepreneurial Award, and that was, we came up with the Best Health Startup Award company in the UK. And the interesting aspect about that was that this is technology agnostic. It is against all sectors. We were not even competing against life sciences companies or medtech companies. This was just any tech companies that Barclays host, and they had hundreds of entries. So it was quite a positive endorsement of companies' work, its potential, influence, and impact. And that's what actually judges were looking for, the innovation and the team and the impact and influence. So pleased about that. Work is going on, and what we would like to set up, because as you know, we have just now discussed the antibiotic resistance and antibiotic stewardship. It's not anyone's one place's problem. It's a global challenge, and it needs multiple stakeholders in it. So this is not just shareholders in the company, but it's the stakeholders. And one of the prominent ones there is regulators. So we would like regulation to be in favor, where we could say maybe making antibiotic testing a compulsory, and some of the countries, for example, in Europe, Denmark is taking a lead in it. We are into discussions in the Scotland, and that could be a positive factor in which we could move. Company Microplate Dx has already been involved and engaged with NICE in the UK at that level, where we are discussion and engagement with how we could contribute to that. And similarly, who we want to work with is that we need clinicians and adopters and commissioners who are understanding why do we need testing before we can just roll out antibiotics or prescribe everywhere, because it's a simple solution. If you put it, then only the right antibiotic to the right patient is given, rather than just needs to be given because in certain, and especially in lower and middle income countries where the infection potential is much larger, to avoid that sort of antibiotic resistance phenomena spreading, where we end up in a situation where patients can't be actually going to operation theater because they are not left with an antibiotic to be prescribed. And that's why we are also engaging with the pharma who are showing interest in there, because it also increases lifespan of their existing antibiotics, because not new ones are being discussed. So I think there is a need, and then there is a recognition of the technology's potential, because it's robust, it's cheap, and it's fast. So I think that's where we are sort of looking to work with the right partners in this.
That was excellent. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Malik, I'd also like to ask you, I think you haven't mentioned your commercial excellence or your background. You were the investment director at Strathclyde University. That's correct?
That's correct. Yes, I am
And
head
you've
of
had a lot
investments.
of success there.
Oh, yeah,
You've had a lot of
absolutely.
success.
I think
Yeah.
Strathclyde is at the forefront of investment and commercialization of deep
Yeah.
technologies, universities' knowledge, and that's been down to university leadership and ethos that we want to contribute to the influence. So, starting with a university principal and vice chancellor, he's always university's focus is that we contribute a place of useful learning, but at the same time contributing to the economy of locally for the Scotland and global. So a lot of excellent research that goes on that comes out in form and as also with students and startups as well as spin-in potential. And we've had a number of companies right from very early stage to support them into spin out stages or startup stages through to follow on. So we basically not only support as part of the Strathclyde Inspire program this commercialization and entrepreneurial activity, but also university puts money where it's supporting these companies by investing alongside commercial investors, and that gives them confidence and comfort in university's technology, but also support longer term because the academics can continue, like even in the Microplate, the two of the leading professors who are the chief scientific officer and technology officer are part of the university's academic staff, which continues to engage, and that research and development innovation capacity gives that confidence boost and potential for further development of the product offering when they are continuing, and that's part of the ethos. So I think a lot of our companies, even just in last quarter, 4 of our companies, including Microplate DX, have raised over £70 million as part of that raise. So I think that's a substantial boost and confidence provider to the university's offering in there. So in terms of commercial experience, yes, I think that's where we are very fortunate to be working with innovative companies.
I think you're one of the transformative elements in STEM these days. So congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Dr. Hannah, okay, so you've obviously, you're developing partners abroad, and we mentioned that you've got one in India, which I think is very exciting because that's a country where I think that this will proliferate because of the numbers. So can you tell me something about the partnership you formed in India, please?
Absolutely, Stephen. So as part of our, I guess, growth journey into 2024 and beyond, it's really important for us now as a company to test the product in the real world, essentially build that valuable clinical feasibility into more pivotal data as time progresses. So we've, to give you a little bit of broader context, first of all, we've established very close connections initially locally as to our advantage, I suppose, with the NHS, Greater Glasgow and Clyde. So working with a consultant microbiologist there, Dr. Michael Murphy, that's been instrumental from day one in terms of getting that clinical view, getting access to patient samples, being able to test our system essentially in situ, getting access to those samples and the patient data to be able to make informed decisions about how our technology is performing in terms of those key performance requirements around sensitivity, specificity, etc. Over the last year or so, that has been broadened, as we've touched on. So we're now working very closely with consultant, Dr. Ashley Price in Newcastle, and building that relationship there as well in terms of testing. But beyond that, for us, as we've touched on numerous times throughout this discussion, I guess we're a global company. AMR is a global challenge, and working with the NHS is fantastic to build that data, but we need to go beyond just the confines of the United Kingdom to be able to really generate those partnerships and ultimately show that global potential for the clinical side of things as well as the commercial side for the business. And one area, as you rightly touch on, and a key geography for us is India. Off the back of COVID, but even before that, antimicrobial resistance is a major challenge in India, even compared to the UK, for instance. And I think there was a report that came out about a year, 18 months back that reported that ultimately AMR in India alone had increased by about 10% as a result of COVID-19, and essentially that is due to all the empirical antibiotics being handed out to treat secondary infections. So it's a major challenge on the ground, and we picked up a couple of years back a relationship with Dr. Aruna Pujari of Breach Candy Hospital in Mumbai. This is a private hospital in Mumbai, but essentially they're seeing a number of patients, real complications now attributed to drug-resistant bacterial infections, and UTIs being, like it is here, a major challenge and making up a major number of the infections that come into that hospital network. So we started discussions, and ultimately, in terms of what they're currently able to achieve with the gold standard technology, as we've already touched on, I suppose the high throughput, yes, but the slow nature by which they were able to get the right treatment to patients is really becoming quite a hindrance on the way they're able to treat patients and their overall care pathway. So we had discussions around the need for sort of rapid diagnostics, and off the back of that, that relationship has flourished. We're in the process of essentially dotting the I's on a study next year to be able to do that feasibility work, where we will be in situ on the ground in India. A number of the team will go over there, we'll set up some devices, we'll perform all the training, we'll have done all the human factors piece, and ultimately we'll be able to get that real clinical data that's going to be so valuable for us as a business. It could be a real kind of nice sweet spot for us to then look at that India market, prove the technology works on the ground there, and actually drive that forward into more widespread adoption if we can get the policymakers engaged as part of those conversations. And that for us really is quite critical now in terms of what we're doing to drive this forward. So again, we're doing something similar in Europe. We're looking for partners again similarly in the US as well, to be able to broaden out where that data is coming in from, because whilst UTIs, there are no major differences, there are still some subtleties in terms of the, background of where patients are coming from in terms of the AMR profile that we see. Resistance to certain drugs here maybe fairly low, but if you go to places like India, resistance could be through the roof, and they're no longer offering those drugs as routine. So what we've tried to do as a business is essentially look at this from a global perspective and come up with a solution that contains antibiotics on a cartridge that not only targets UTIs in say Scotland or the UK, but actually has that global appeal. And we've aligned it to essentially European and US regulatory guidelines as well, so that the antibiotics that we are testing will meet all the needs when it comes to the eventual regulatory submissions in both from a CE marking and an FDA perspective. And these are conversations that are ongoing with the FDA as it stands.
Oh, fantastic. All right, that's quite exciting. I'm pleased about India. I think that was an obvious target, a great target to achieve.
So we've done a fair bit of health economics analysis, certainly from a UK perspective. And this was interesting because you can delineate UTIs into, I suppose, uncomplicated or more complicated as per the vernacular. Now, there's arguments till the cows come home whether uncomplicated UTIs really are such and whether they should also be treated with the due respect and the care. But in terms of that clinical perspective, you can make that distinction. Even for uncomplicated UTIs, we had some health economics performed looking at it from an NHS perspective. And if you take into account, I suppose, that overarching healthcare piece, if you look at the financial savings, the savings are very close to $200 per US per patient receiving a course of antibiotics. Essentially, being able to treat them quicker, avoiding the hospitalizations, avoiding lengthy bed stays, and avoiding the clinical complications like sepsis. So for every patient needing an antibiotic, $200 potentially could be saved from implementing a rapid diagnostic test, even at test costs, which could in theory exceed like for like the current gold standard testing. That is the overarching saving that can be made. It's now really working with the right partners and players and bringing them into the discussions to look at that overarching angle. How do we then use that in the context of a point of care technology to be able to show that there may be some costs associated up front, but the overarching saving is there. And how do you then split that as a sort of systems-wide model to point of care testing, which is not unique to us as a business, but it's certainly always a classic point of care type question to be answered, isn't it?
So Dr. Malik mentioned earlier that you're talking to NICE, the diagnostic pathway, which is fantastic, and getting them involved.
I think from the point of view, as you said, we are looking, because a regulatory piece is a key piece. So which is why engagement with NICE is critical requirement, because we are not saying that this is a carrot and stick approach, but it's also realization by regulators where regulation can be an enabler. So if until and unless it is required by the regulation to say that there is a pathway how GPs can make a prescription? Is it so similarly, is it coded in the US is different thing? In the UK, how does it fit in the process pathway? Where will they get funding for it if the test were to be prescribed? Can they have the approval for it, and is it written in the system? So I think that's where we are required to work with those regulatory bodies to enable that process so that the implementation and adoption is easier. The need is recognized, but the setup where the investors or the investors or the other partners or even clinicians to say that how do they implement it into their working pathway. And if in other countries, for example, we are looking at various models and various ways, as you said, where it can be implemented. So one of the simplest thing would be, can the primary care line, which is general practitioners in the UK, or similarly in the Europe. In India, there are simple direct sort of doctors can directly work themselves. Can they do it within their system, or is it through pharmacies? That's the other route that we are looking at. If pharmacies are able to do it, a test at their point before they are handing out prescription antibiotics, that will simplify the life for patients, save time, and be cost effective going to that point, as that you were asking for that. And similarly, and the care homes is another point where it is critical requirement that it could work. And from the point of view, if you are looking into the population where it fits in, I think from US requirement point of view, it will need to fit it into that pathways where the doctors can claim for it. And that coding will work, come across working with the partners. So we do need our partners to do research studies and clinical trials in various form. You asked for the academics and the hospital clinicians who are actually keen adopters of technology and are really been wanting to work with us so that we can, once we are there at that point in that country to set up. And like Stuart mentioned about India, similarly, like-minded partners in different places who are ready and willing to try our offering, we will be there, and timeline we can discuss when we are ready to hand this out and set up those trials, but that would be keen. And similarly, commissioners who can tell us about the pathways, because adoption of any new technology, as anyone who's a healthcare specialist or a technology will know, that the leaders or the laggards. So we are wanting leaders who are wishing to work with us and tell us intricate details about how do we get incorporated into the system by working alongside in collaboration and partnership.
I think you've summarised that really well. I think the one point I would add is just looking at this as an overarching antimicrobial stewardship piece, because ultimately, you know, we may think we've got the arsenal of antibiotics to treat infections today, but as we've already touched on downstream, these will very, very quickly, as we've seen in certain countries, dry up, and that availability of antibiotic stocks will just go. And we're not developing drugs quickly enough. The vaccine development piece for AMR is certainly not there yet either. Diagnostics and rapid diagnostics, crucially to avoid that broad spectrum and initial antibiotic prescription, are absolutely vital. And I think what's interesting to us, Stephen, I think, is when you look at the likes of Denmark that have implemented mandatory antibiotic susceptibility testing, that's not a perfect solution. They're still relying on technologies that take a couple of days to return results. But the will is there to make that policy change. And I think getting the KOLs, the stakeholders involved from a clinical perspective is absolutely vital here. But it's identifying those that have got the ear of government. It's actually being able to then affect those policy changes, which I think is really vital here. Because ultimately, you talk to people involved in terms of looking at antibiotic prescribing guidelines, and even here where we're doing that, I think there's major holes in terms of that data, in terms of how they're actually making decisions about some of that because of the amount of empirical prescribing going on. That would be solved by this technology. So it's bringing all these key stakeholders together, as Poonam's already identified so eloquently. I think that ultimately is how do we close the loop on this without necessarily having to do all the banging of the drum ourselves, if that makes sense.
No, it's fantastic. I've really enjoyed the conversation today.
So the Microplate Dx offering, as we discussed, is a phenotypic testing it's a platform technology and quite flexible in terms of the size and the shape. So we also have another offering in which we are calling it a research use only system, in which we could work for antibiotic testing, sterility testing, cell testing. So pharma partners or other interested parties who wish to use that offering, we could, because there is a less regulatory barrier in there. So I think there is an enormous potential of working with them, people to that side of aspects. So if any of the listeners are thinking that they would need, because our technology basically can identify and the gel modified system that are there in wells can work, that would be another avenue that we would be open for discussions, because that can come to the market and be supplied much easier. And it can be, say, larger 96 well or 120 wells or 48 wells, depending on that. We could work towards that.
So I wanted to thank you both for your time today, and I look forward to re-engaging with you in about another 6 months or so, if that's all right.
Absolutely, Stephen. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.